A single mother walked 6 miles through pouring rain to get to a job interview. A billionaire CEO sat in his car and watched her the entire way. He didn't stop her. He didn't offer a ride. He didn't send anyone to help. He just watched. She had no idea he was there. She had no idea the interview was for his company. She had no idea that by the time she reached those doors, soaking wet and shaking, she would force him to confront a truth about himself he'd been running from for decades. And nothing for either of them would ever be the same. Knox Sterling had not built a $4.7 billion logistics empire by believing what people told him. He built it by watching what they did when they thought no one was looking. Early that morning, he sat in the back of a black Maybach S-Class, parked on a rain-slicked street in downtown Charlotte. The leather seats were heated. The air smelled like sandalwood and fresh espresso from a premium cup his assistant ordered every morning. His Tom Ford suit cost more than most families spent on rent in 6 months. His watch, a Patek Philippe, had been earned by him alone because Knox had no family legacy to inherit. It caught the glow of his phone screen as he scrolled through candidate files. He was alone. He was always alone. Sterling Logistics moved freight across 31 states, with warehouses in 9 cities, a fleet of 42,000 trucks, and contracts with retailers whose names every American knew. Knox had started the company young with a single box truck, a phone with a cracked screen, and a willingness to drive long hours without stopping. His mother, Irene, had been a night shift worker at a packaging plant. His father left before Knox learned to ride a bicycle. He knew what labor felt like. He remembered the weight of it in his shoulders, the ache of it in his lower back, the taste of gas station coffee in the early hours. But that was long ago. And memory, he had learned, was a liar that softened everything it touched. Years earlier, a man named Julian Crane had nearly destroyed everything Knox built. Julian was his COO, his closest advisor, the only person in the company Knox called by first name. They had built the Southeast expansion together, shoulder to shoulder, through long days and weekend strategy calls, the kind of partnership that felt like brotherhood. Then the auditors found the accounts. 17 shell companies redirected vendor payments, falsified invoices stretching back years. Julian had siphoned millions while sitting 3 offices down from Knox, smiling at him every single morning. The betrayal didn't just cost money, it cost Knox something he could never replace. His ability to believe that loyalty was real. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. He said it in board meetings. He said it in interviews. He said it to himself every time someone promised him something. Promises were air. Resumes were fiction. References were performances. The only truth was behavior. Unscripted, unrehearsed, unobserved behavior. That was why Knox Sterling, billionaire CEO of one of the largest logistics companies in the Southeast, personally attended final round interviews for a mid-level position that paid a modest salary. Operations coordinator, nothing glamorous, but the role sat at the nerve center of daily freight movement. And Knox believed that you could tell everything about a person by how they handled pressure when no one was grading them. His method was unusual. His board hated it. His HR director, Vivian Hollis, had called it invasive more than once. Before every final candidate interview, Knox visited their neighborhood, not their home, just the area. He watched how they left in the morning. Did they rush or prepare? Were they frantic or focused? Did they check their appearance or did they not care? Did someone drive them or did they find their own way? He never interfered, never introduced himself early, never offered anything. He simply observed and then he decided. Ellis, his driver for years, adjusted the rearview mirror. The rain had picked up. Thick sheets of water dragged across the windshield, bending the streetlights into long orange smears against the glass. "Next address, sir?" Ellis asked. Knox looked down at his phone. The file was thin. Maren Price, single mother, previous experience in logistics coordination at a small regional firm, employment gap of many months. No vehicle listed, no emergency contact other than a neighbor. On paper, she was the weakest candidate in the pool. The address was given. Ellis pulled into traffic without another word. The wipers beat a steady rhythm against the glass. The heater hummed. The rain kept falling. And somewhere across the city in a low-income apartment complex with a broken buzzer and a stairwell that smelled like mildew, Maren Price was already awake, already dressed, already running out of options. The sky over Charlotte was the color of wet concrete. Not the dramatic kind of storm that made the news or knocked out power lines. This was the other kind, the slow, steady, bone-deep rain that started before dawn and had no intention of stopping, the kind that didn't thunder or flash. It just fell relentlessly, like gravity had turned personal. Knox's Maybach rolled through East Charlotte. The neighborhoods changed quickly here. Glass office towers gave way to strip malls with check-cashing storefronts. Then the strip malls gave way to apartment complexes with chain-link fences and parking lots where half the cars had expired tags. Ellis slowed as they approached the complex. It was a 3-story brick building, the kind built decades ago and never renovated. Metal staircases bolted to the exterior, a playground out front with a broken swing set, puddles gathering in the cracked asphalt like small lakes. Knox leaned forward slightly. The car was parked a couple blocks away beneath a row of oak trees, heavy with rain, far enough to be invisible, close enough to see the front entrance clearly. "Engine off," Knox said. "We wait." Ellis turned the key. The heater died. Within minutes, cold began creeping in through the window seals, just enough to remind Knox that warmth was a privilege, not a constant. He ignored it. His eyes stayed fixed on the building's front door. The door opened. A woman stepped out. Young, slim, dark hair pulled back tight. She wore a navy blazer that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, the kind of blazer that had been carefully maintained despite not being carefully purchased. Dark slacks, practical, clean, no umbrella. In her left hand, she carried a plastic grocery bag knotted at the top, wrapped carefully around something flat. Documents. She held it close to her chest, shielding it from the rain with her own body. In her right hand, a pair of heels, black, low, professional, dangling by the straps. On her feet, a pair of old running shoes, white once, now gray from miles of wear. She looked up at the sky just once, a brief assessment, not surprise, not frustration, just acknowledgement. Then she turned left onto the sidewalk and started walking. No car, no ride, no one walking with her, just a woman in the rain heading east alone. Knox watched her cross the parking lot, step over a puddle, and disappear around the corner onto Garfield Avenue. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He counted to 10 in his head the way he always did before making decisions, and then opened his mouth. "Follow her," he said quietly. "Keep distance. Don't let her see us." Ellis looked at him in the rearview mirror. He had been Knox Sterling's driver for years and had seen many things, but something in his employer's voice that morning was different, sharper, almost hungry. "Yes, sir," Ellis said, starting the engine. The Maybach pulled forward, slow, silent, its headlights off despite the rain. 2 blocks behind a woman who had no idea she was being watched. Inside the car, warmth returned in seconds. Heated leather, climate control, insulated glass that muffled the sound of rain to a whisper. Outside, Maren Price felt every single drop. Knox's jaw tightened. She was heading toward downtown. The Sterling Logistics Building was 6 miles east. She has time, he thought. That's enough time if she keeps walking. He settled back into the leather seat and crossed one leg over the other. His coffee was still warm. His suit was still dry. His world was still perfectly controlled. But a question had lodged itself behind his ribs, quiet and stubborn, and it wouldn't leave. How far will she go before she quits? Maren Price had been awake since before dawn, but she hadn't set an alarm. She didn't need one. Fear woke her up the way it always did, silent and sharp, sitting on her chest like a stone dropped in the dark. She lay still for a few seconds. She always counted to 7. It was a habit she'd picked up during the worst months, a way to remind herself that the day hadn't started yet, that she still had a few seconds where nothing had gone wrong. Then she got up. The apartment belonged to Beatrice Davenport, a retired postal worker who lived nearby. Beatrice had a 2-bedroom with a kitchen that smelled like cinnamon and a couch that sagged in the middle but was covered with a clean quilt. She had taken in Maren and Zara without being asked. She just knocked on the door one evening and said, "Get your things. You're staying with me until this gets sorted. No paperwork, no conditions, no lectures." Maren moved through the dark apartment with the quiet precision of someone used to not waking anyone up. She showered quickly, cold water because Beatrice's hot water heater had been unreliable, and Maren refused to use what little hot water there was before Beatrice woke up. She dressed in the bathroom. The blazer was navy, purchased secondhand years ago. She had dry cleaned it twice since then, both times spending money she didn't really have. The slacks were black, the only pair without a stain or a tear. She pressed them the night before with a damp towel and a hot pan because Beatrice didn't own an iron. Inside the left pocket of the blazer, folded into a square the size of a matchbox, was a piece of lined notebook paper. Zara had written it in purple crayon months ago, back when the letters were still shaky and uncertain. 5 words. You can do it, Mama. No period, no punctuation, just belief. Raw and ungrammatical and absolute. Marin touched it briefly through the fabric. Still there, she exhaled. She checked her phone. Weather alert for heavy rain. The bus route that ran from East Charlotte to the downtown business district had been suspended due to weather conditions. Service would resume at an undetermined time. Marin stared at the screen for a few seconds. Then she opened her banking app. The balance was painfully low. She checked ride-sharing apps. The cheapest ride to Sterling Logistics headquarters was far more than she could afford. She closed both apps. She walked to the kitchen, packed Zara's lunch for school in a brown paper bag. Turkey sandwich cut diagonally the way Zara liked. An apple, a juice box, a note on a yellow sticky. Have the best day. I love you more than the whole sky. She left it on the counter next to Beatrice's coffee mug. Then she slipped into Zara's room. Her daughter slept on her side, arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit named Clover that had been washed so many times its ears had gone limp. Marin knelt beside the bed, brushed a curl from Zara's forehead, whispered something too quiet to hear. She stood up, grabbed the plastic bag with her documents inside, slipped on her old running shoes, tucked her heels into her bag, and walked out the front door into the rain. At the bus stop, the bench was empty. The shelter's plexiglass panel was cracked and offered no protection. The sign read, "Service suspended." Marin stood there for a moment. She looked east toward downtown, 6 miles. She had time, barely. If she walked fast, if she didn't stop. Her shoes were old but polished. Her blazer was secondhand but pressed. Her plan had fallen apart, but her feet kept moving. Marin Price turned east and started walking, not because she had a choice, but because choice had been taken from her so many times that the only thing left was the decision to keep going, and that she had decided a long time ago was the one thing no one could take. Rain hit her face before she reached the end of the block. Cold, steady, the kind that found every gap in clothing, every seam, every patch of exposed skin. It soaked through her blazer within minutes, pressing the fabric flat against her shoulders like a second skin made of cold and damp. Her running shoes, already worn thin at the soles, began to absorb water with every step. By the second block, they made a soft squishing sound against the pavement, a rhythm she couldn't silence no matter how carefully she walked. She held the plastic bag against her chest. Inside it, sealed in a gallon-sized Ziploc she'd taken from Beatrice's kitchen, were her documents. Resume, 2 letters of recommendation, a printed copy of the job listing, a photocopy of her social security card. Everything she needed to prove she was worth hiring, wrapped in layers of plastic because she couldn't afford to let rain erase the only evidence of her qualifications. Her body stayed dry nowhere, but the documents stayed dry everywhere. That was the math of her life. Now protect what matters. Absorb everything else. She passed a gas station on Monroe Road where a man was running from his car to the door, newspaper over his head, cursing the weather. She passed a laundromat that was still dark inside, chairs stacked on tables, closed sign hanging crooked. She passed a church parking lot where the puddles were so deep they covered the painted lines entirely. No one else was walking. In every direction, the sidewalks were empty. Cars moved through the rain like fish through murky water, their headlights blurred, their drivers invisible behind fogged glass. She was the only person on foot in a city designed for people with cars. Over a year earlier, Marin had a car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with high mileage and a check engine light that never went off. She had a job, too. Assistant manager at a regional logistics company called Trident Distribution, handling route scheduling for a fleet of 42 trucks across the Carolinas. She was good at it. Her supervisor said so in writing. Organized, reliable, excellent under pressure. Those words still lived on one of the recommendation letters sealed in plastic against her chest. Then the company restructured. That was the word they used, restructured, as if the act of cutting jobs and closing offices was an architectural decision, a renovation, something clean and intentional. Marin's position was eliminated. She was given a box for her desk items and a short period of severance. That was the exchange rate on her labor. Zara's father had left months before the layoff. He didn't leave a note or a forwarding address, just an empty closet and a utility bill he'd never paid. No child support, no communication, no court order enforced, because you can't enforce a document against someone the system can't find. So Marin became everything: mother, provider, cook, driver, nurse, accountant, bedtime storyteller, early morning alarm. She held every role because no one else showed up for the cast. Then the dominoes fell. Job lost. Health insurance gone. Zara developed a severe ear infection that wouldn't respond to the first round of antibiotics. Emergency room visit. Specialist referral. Follow-up appointment. Total bill thousands. Unpaid. Sent to collections. Credit score destroyed. Rent came due. Marin paid it with the last of her savings. Then she couldn't. She begged the landlord for an extension. Eventually, the eviction notice arrived. She and Zara were out. Dozens of job applications over many months. She kept a spreadsheet on her phone, updating it like a prayer list. Company name, date applied, position title, status. Many said no response. A few led to interviews. All ended the same way: a polite email. "We've decided to move forward with another candidate. We wish you the best." She never stopped applying. This morning's interview was another chance. Sterling Logistics Operations Coordinator, salary decent, benefits included. It wasn't a dream job. It was a lifeline dressed in a job title. The rain came harder. Marin's left shoe began making a louder sound, a slap instead of a squish. She shifted her grip on the plastic bag. Her arms ached from holding it against her chest. Her fingers were going numb, but inside the pocket of her blazer, folded small and warm against her body heat, 5 purple words kept her feet moving. "You can do it, Mama." This time had to be different. By the second mile, her body started sending messages she couldn't afford to hear. The cold had moved past her skin and settled into muscle. Her shoulders ached from holding the plastic bag against her chest. Her blazer, soaked through, now hung heavy on her frame like a wet blanket draped over a wire hanger. The fabric clung to her arms, pulling with every step, adding weight she didn't have the calories to carry. She hadn't eaten breakfast. The last food had gone into Zara's lunchbox. That was the equation every morning. Feed the child first. Whatever's left is yours. Most mornings, nothing was left. Her stomach cramped, a dull, low ache that tightened with each block. She breathed through it the way she breathed through everything, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Keep walking. The rain intensified. What had been steady became aggressive. Drops hit the pavement so hard they bounced back up, creating a mist that rose from the sidewalk like steam from a grate. Marin's running shoes were no longer shoes. They were sponges strapped to her feet, heavy and squelching, the soles so waterlogged that each step felt like peeling tape off a surface. Then the car came. A silver SUV moving too fast through the right lane hit a puddle the size of a kiddie pool, and a wall of brown water erupted from the curb. It struck Marin from the waist down. Dirty, cold, gritty water soaked through her slacks, splashed up her blazer, dripping off the plastic bag she clutched like a shield. She stopped. She stood perfectly still for a few seconds. Eyes closed, fists tight, rain hammering her face, every nerve in her body screaming the same word: stop, stop, stop walking, stop trying, stop pretending this will end differently than every other time. Then she opened her eyes, looked down at the plastic bag, peeled back the knot just enough to check. The Ziploc inside was still sealed. The documents were still dry. She was soaked from head to toe, freezing, exhausted, hungry, humiliated by a stranger's carelessness. But the only thing that mattered was still protected. That was the math. That had always been the math. She could break. The papers could not. Marin retied the bag, shifted it back against her chest, and started walking again. If I stop, nothing changes. If I keep walking, maybe everything does. She said it in her head like a metronome, 1 sentence per step. The words became rhythm. The rhythm became motion. The motion became the only thing keeping her upright. She crossed a wide intersection. The area was exposed, and for a moment, the rain hit her sideways, driving into her left ear, blurring her vision. She held the bag tighter and leaned into it like a sailor leaning into a gale. 2 blocks behind, the Maybach crept forward through traffic. Knox Sterling had not moved from his position in the back seat. His coffee was cold. His phone had buzzed many times. He hadn't touched it. He was watching a woman drown on dry land, and he couldn't look away. She's still walking, Knox said. The words came out quieter than he intended, as if speaking too loudly might somehow reach her through the rain and the glass and the distance he had chosen to keep. Ellis glanced in the rearview mirror. He had been Knox's driver for years. He knew when to speak and when to stay silent. This morning, for the first time in a long time, he chose to speak. "Sir, she's completely soaked. It's cold out. Should we offer her a ride to the office?" "No." The word landed hard in the quiet car. Ellis's hands tightened on the steering wheel just slightly. "She doesn't know who we are," Knox continued, his eyes still fixed on the figure moving through the rain ahead. "She doesn't know she's being watched. That's the point. I need to see what she does when no one's looking, when there's no audience, when there's no reward. Words are free. That's why they're worthless." The motif played in his head like a recording. He had built his entire philosophy on it. Resumes lie. Interviews are performances. References are scripted. The only thing that tells the truth is behavior. Unobserved, unrehearsed, uncompensated behavior. And right now, he was watching the purest form of it he had ever seen. A woman walking through a storm because she had no other option and refusing to stop because she had something worth walking for. But Ellis's question had planted something uncomfortable beneath Knox's ribs, a splinter he couldn't quite reach. He was testing her. Fine. He had tested every final candidate this way, but none of them had ever been walking 6 miles in the rain. None of them had ever been this desperate, and none of them had ever made him feel like the test itself might be the cruelest thing in the room. "She could get sick," Ellis said, not looking in the mirror this time, just staring ahead at the road. "Pneumonia, hypothermia, she's not dressed for this." "I'm aware," Knox said. "Then why are we still following her?" Knox didn't answer because the honest answer was one he wasn't ready to say out loud. He was following her because she fascinated him, because her refusal to stop contradicted everything he'd come to expect from people, because in all his years of hiring and firing and managing and observing, he had never once seen someone choose suffering over surrender with this kind of quiet, unperformative resolve. But there was another reason, darker, less noble. He was following her because it cost him nothing. He was warm. She was not. He was dry. She was not. He was watching her pain from the comfort of heated leather, and some part of him, some part buried beneath the suits and the empire and the philosophy about words being worthless, knew that his inaction was its own kind of test, not of her, of him. And he was failing. Ellis kept driving. Knox kept watching. And 2 blocks ahead, Marin kept walking, unaware that the man who would decide her future was measuring her from behind tinted glass while doing nothing to ease the weight she carried. Somewhere around the 4th mile, Marin's phone buzzed in her back pocket. She almost didn't answer. Her fingers were numb and clumsy, and pulling the phone out meant shifting the plastic bag to one arm, exposing the documents to rain for the seconds it took to check the screen. But the caller ID said Beatrice. Marin stopped under the narrow overhang of a closed barber shop. It wasn't much shelter, just a bit of aluminum awning that cut the rain from a downpour to a drizzle. She pressed her back against the locked door and answered. "Hey, Miss Beatrice, everything okay?" "Everything's fine, baby. Zara's up. She's eating her breakfast. She wanted to talk to you before I take her to school." A rustling sound, then a small voice, bright and clear, untouched by the cold and the dark and the math of poverty that governed every other part of Marin's life. "Mama?" Marin closed her eyes. "Hey, baby girl." "Mama, is it raining?" Marin looked out at the street. Water poured from gutters in thick streams. A trash can had tipped over in the wind. The sky was so dark it looked like evening, not morning. Rain fell so hard it created a roar, a constant white noise that swallowed every other sound. "Just a little," Marin said. Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. "Don't forget your umbrella," Zara said. Marin pressed her lips together, swallowed once, twice. "I won't, baby. I won't forget." "Are you going to get the job, Mama?" "I'm going to try my very best. I wrote you a note. Did you bring it?" Marin's free hand moved to the left pocket of her blazer. Through the wet fabric, she felt the small, folded square of paper still there, still dry against her body heat. "I brought it," she whispered. "I always bring it." "Good, because you can do it, Mama. I wrote it so you'd remember." "I remember, baby. Every single day." "Okay. I love you more than the whole sky." Marin opened her mouth. No sound came for a couple of seconds. Then softly, like a prayer spoken to no one and everyone at once, she said, "I love you more than the whole sky and all the stars in it." The call ended. Marin pulled the phone from her ear, stood under that aluminum overhang for another few seconds, wiped her face with the back of her hand. Rain or tears, it didn't matter which. The result was the same. Wet skin, burning eyes, and a reason to keep walking that no storm on earth could wash away. She tucked the phone back into her pocket, shifted the plastic bag to both arms, stepped back into the rain, and walked faster than before. Scientists have a word for what Marin Price carried that morning. Not in the plastic bag against her chest, not in the blazer pocket where a child's note stayed folded and dry. They mean something deeper, something that can't be soaked by rain, or broken by rejection, or erased by dozens of unanswered applications. They call it grit. A psychologist named Angela Duckworth began studying why some people succeed where others equally talented give up. Her research, conducted across military academies, spelling bees, corporate boardrooms, and inner-city classrooms, revealed something that surprised nearly everyone. The strongest predictor of long-term success was not intelligence, not talent, not education, not connections. It was the ability to maintain effort and interest over years despite failure, despite adversity, despite the complete absence of visible progress. She called it grit, and she found it in the most unlikely places. Not in the offices of billionaires, not in the boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies. Grit appeared most often in people who had been told no so many times that the word had lost its power. People who woke up every morning facing a wall and chose to push against it anyway. Not because they believed the wall would move, but because standing still was worse. In America, a significant percentage of single mothers live below the poverty line, and the average job seeker in the United States sends between 100 and 200 applications before receiving an offer. For women with resume gaps, for mothers without reliable childcare listed on their applications, for candidates from zip codes that hiring algorithms quietly filter out, that number climbs higher. Much higher. Marin's dozens of applications over many months were not an exaggeration. They were not dramatic fiction. They were her reality. Grit is not loud. It doesn't give speeches. It doesn't post motivational quotes or attend conferences or write books about itself. Grit is a woman waking up before dawn without an alarm. It is cold water because someone else needs the hot. It is checking a banking app that shows very little and then putting on shoes and walking east into a rainstorm because east is where the interview is and walking is the only verb left in her vocabulary. But Marin didn't know any of those studies. She had never heard of Angela Duckworth. She didn't have language for the thing inside her that refused to stop. She just knew that her daughter needed her to keep walking. And so she did. By the 5th mile, her legs had stopped hurting, not because the pain was gone, but because her body had moved past pain into something else entirely, a numbness that wasn't physical, a stillness in her chest that felt like resignation's quieter, braver cousin. Acceptance, not of defeat, but of the cost. This is what it costs, she thought. This is what it cost to try again. And I'll pay it, because I've been paying it for many months, and I haven't gone bankrupt yet. The rain had thinned slightly, still falling, still cold, but the violent sheets of earlier had softened into a steady, almost rhythmic curtain. Marin could see farther now. The buildings ahead were taller, the sidewalks wider. She was entering the business district, and with every block, the world around her grew cleaner, newer, more expensive. A silver Honda Accord pulled up alongside her at a red light. The window rolled down. A woman in her 40s, curly hair under a rain hat, reading glasses perched on her nose, leaned across the passenger seat. "Sweetheart, you're soaking wet. Can I give you a ride somewhere?" Marin looked at her. Warm car, dry seats, heat blowing from the vents hard enough to ripple the woman's scarf. It would take only a couple of minutes. The Sterling building was less than a mile away. She could be there in the time it took to buckle a seatbelt. She almost said yes. The word rose in her throat like a reflex. Yes, please. God, yes. But something stopped her. Not pride, not stubbornness. Something older and quieter than either of those. She had asked for help so many times. From Zara's father who left. From the landlord who evicted her, from the unemployment office where she waited hours and was told her paperwork was incomplete, from interviewers who smiled politely and chose someone else, from a system that saw her as a statistic and processed her accordingly. She had walked many miles through a rainstorm alone, hungry, freezing, and she was still standing, still moving, still holding dry documents against a wet chest. If she got in that car, she would arrive at the interview dry and comfortable, but she would arrive owing someone else for the last mile. And she was tired of owing, tired of depending, tired of arriving somewhere and knowing that she only got there because someone else carried her. "I appreciate it, ma'am," Marin said. Her voice trembled slightly, her teeth chattered between words. "But I need to do this myself." The woman stared at her for a long moment, not with pity, with something closer to recognition, as if she'd seen that look before, maybe in her own mirror, maybe in another life. "You're something else, you know that?" the woman said softly. "I'm just a mom," Marin replied, trying to get to work. The woman smiled, nodded once, rolled up her window, and drove away. Marin stood at the intersection for a few more seconds. The light turned green. She stepped off the curb and kept walking. 2 blocks back, behind tinted glass, Knox Sterling sat perfectly still. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on his knees. He had watched the entire exchange. Ellis glanced at the rearview mirror. In all his years of driving Knox Sterling through mergers and lawsuits and funerals and celebrations, he had seen many expressions on his employer's face: anger, calculation, control, satisfaction, boredom. He had never once seen confusion, but that is exactly what he saw now. Confusion. And beneath it, something Ellis couldn't quite name. Something that looked, if he had to guess, like the first crack in a wall that had been standing for a very long time. Knox said nothing. Ellis said nothing. The Maybach rolled forward, and the distance between the billionaire in the car and the mother in the rain stayed exactly the same. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. Knox had said it 1,000 times in board meetings, in interviews, to himself in the mirror on mornings when trust tried to creep back into his chest and he had to beat it down with logic. But sitting in the back of that Maybach, watching a woman refuse a stranger's kindness because she needed to finish what she started on her own 2 feet, the sentence played differently in his head, like a record he'd been listening to for decades that suddenly skipped and landed on a note he'd never heard before. Words are free. That's why they're worthless. Fine. Then what was walking worth? What was the price of 6 miles in cold rain with no umbrella, no breakfast, and almost nothing in your bank account? What did it cost to hold a plastic bag against your chest for the entire journey because the documents inside mattered more than the body carrying them? What was the going rate for turning down a warm car from a kind stranger because you'd rather arrive soaking wet on your own terms than dry on someone else's? If words were free, then what Marin Price was doing right now was the most expensive statement Knox Sterling had ever witnessed, and she was paying for it with her body, with her comfort, with every calorie she didn't eat that morning so her daughter could have food instead. A memory surfaced, uninvited, unwelcome, decades buried and suddenly right there, clear as glass. Irene Sterling, his mother, before she married Reed, Knox's stepfather, before the house in the suburbs and the 2-car garage and the version of stability that eventually let Knox go to community college and then build an empire. Before all of that, Irene had been alone, young, 1 son, no degree, working the night shift at a packaging plant. And one night, the car broke down. Transmission dead. Couldn't be fixed until later in the week, and she didn't get paid unless she showed up. So she walked. Knox was young. He didn't remember all of it, but he remembered the shoes. His mother's white sneakers by the front door when he woke up in the morning, soaking wet soles, peeling, lined with newspaper to absorb the water, and next to them her work boots already dry, already ready for the next shift. She never told him she walked. He figured it out years later doing the math in his head. No bus ran that route late. No cab company served that part of town, and his stepfather wasn't in the picture yet. She just walked many miles alone at night because showing up was the only option. And Irene Sterling was not a woman who confused difficulty with impossibility. Knox hadn't thought about those shoes in decades. He was thinking about them now. Outside the windshield, Marin was approaching the business district, less than a mile to go. Her pace hadn't slowed. If anything, she was walking faster. Her back was straight. Her arms were locked around that plastic bag. She looked like a woman marching into battle with nothing but the decision to show up. Knox's throat tightened. He swallowed once, then again. "Ellis," he said, "when she gets to the building, call the front desk. Tell them to have a cup of coffee ready, hot, black, and hand it to the woman who walks in wet. Don't tell her it's from me. Don't tell her anything. Just give her the coffee." Ellis looked in the rearview mirror. For the first time that morning, something in Knox's face had changed. Not softened exactly, more like shifted, like a wall that had been standing for decades had developed its first hairline crack, thin as a thread but running deep. "Yes, sir," Ellis said, and that was all. No grand gesture, no revelation, just a cup of coffee ordered quietly from the back of a luxury car for a woman who would never know where it came from. But it was the first thing Knox Sterling had given anyone in years without calculating what he'd get back, and it terrified him. The Sterling Logistics Building rose many stories of glass and steel against the gray Charlotte sky. Marin saw it from blocks away. She had looked it up the night before, memorizing the address, studying the exterior on Google Street View so she wouldn't hesitate at the entrance, wouldn't look lost, wouldn't give anyone a reason to doubt she belonged. She didn't belong. She knew that. But she was here, and being here was enough for now. 6 miles, nearly 2 hours. Her body told her everything she needed to know. Every muscle ached. Her feet felt swollen inside waterlogged shoes. Her blazer was a cold, damp weight on her shoulders. Her fingers were stiff and tinged with cold, but she was on time, minutes early. She pushed through the revolving door into the lobby, and the warmth hit her like a wall. Climate-controlled air wrapped around her soaked body with a gentleness that almost made her knees buckle. Marble floors, tall ceilings, a massive photo of a silver-haired man in a dark suit on the wall behind the reception desk. She didn't look at it long. She had somewhere to be first. The restroom was on the ground floor. She walked quickly, leaving wet footprints on the marble, hoping no one noticed. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in nearly 2 hours, she was alone in a room with walls, with a ceiling, with a mirror. She set the plastic bag on the counter, opened it, pulled out the Ziploc, ran her fingers across the sealed edge. Dry. Everything inside perfectly dry. Resume. Letters, documents, all of it untouched. She exhaled a long, shaking breath that carried the weight of 6 miles. Then she went to work. She pulled off the running shoes, stuffed them into the plastic bag, slipped on the black heels she'd carried the entire way. They were dry. They fit. She stood taller, and something in her posture changed immediately. Like the shoes remembered a version of her she was still trying to get back to. She took off the blazer, held it over the sink, and wrung it with both hands. Water poured out in a steady stream. She wrung it again and again until it was damp instead of dripping. She put it back on, pulled the lapels straight, smoothed the shoulders with her palms. Her hair was plastered to her head. She finger-combed it back, pulling it into the tightest low bun she could manage. Found a single bobby pin in her pocket. Secured it. Not elegant, but neat, controlled. She looked in the mirror. A woman stared back at her, eyes bloodshot from cold wind, skin pale from exhaustion and low blood sugar, blazer darker at the shoulders where the water still clung, but posture straight, chin level, gaze steady. Not perfect, not even close, but ready. She reached into the left blazer pocket, pulled out the folded square of lined notebook paper, purple crayon. 5 words. She read them once slowly, like a prayer she'd memorized but needed to hear again anyway. "You can do it, Mama." She folded it back along the same creases, placed it in the breast pocket of the blazer, left side over her heart. Then she picked up the Ziploc bag, straightened her shoulders, and walked out. Many floors above, Knox Sterling stood at the window of his corner office. The glass stretched floor to ceiling, overlooking the main entrance below. He had entered through the parking garage, taken the private elevator, spoken to no one. His suit was still perfect. His coffee had been refreshed. His morning looked exactly like every other morning in the fortress he had built around himself. But something was different. He watched the front door. Soon, it revolved and a woman stepped through. Wet blazer, black heels, straight back, head held level despite the slight tremor in her shoulders that even many floors of distance couldn't hide. She was shaking, but she was walking forward, and she didn't look down once. Knox pressed his palm flat against the glass. It was cold. He held it there for a few seconds. Then he turned, picked up his phone, and called Vivian Hollis. I'll be sitting in on the final interviews today. A pause. Sir, this is for the coordinator position. You don't usually attend these. Today, I do. The waiting room on one of the upper floors of Sterling Logistics was designed to make people feel small. Not intentionally, probably, but the effect was the same. High ceilings, gray carpets so clean it looked painted, leather chairs that whispered money when you sat down, a glass table with neatly fanned copies of Forbes and Bloomberg Businessweek, a water dispenser with cucumber slices floating in it. Cucumber in a waiting room for a modest salary job. Marin sat in the second chair from the door. She had chosen it deliberately, not the first chair too eager, not the last too passive. Second, present, visible, but not desperate. 3 other candidates sat in the room. A man in his late 30s in a charcoal suit, so crisp it looked like he'd removed the tags that morning. A woman in a burgundy blazer with a leather portfolio and a confidence that filled the room like perfume. And another man, mid-20s, blue suit, expensive watch, hair slicked back with something that smelled like sandalwood and certainty. They were all dry, every single one of them, perfectly groomed, not a hair displaced, not a wrinkle visible. They had arrived by car, by Uber, by lives that included the option of getting from one place to another without drowning along the way. Marin was still damp. Her blazer had dried enough to pass at a distance, but up close the fabric at her shoulders was noticeably darker. Her shoes were dry. Yes, her documents were dry. Absolutely. But her hair was still slightly wet at the nape, and a single drop of water rolled down the back of her neck every few minutes, cold and persistent, like a reminder of every mile she'd walked. The young man noticed first. He leaned toward the woman in burgundy, angling his body away from Marin but keeping his voice just loud enough to carry. Did she swim here? A snort, a covered mouth, eyes that flickered to Marin and then away quick enough to pretend they hadn't. Marin heard it. She felt the words land on her skin the way the rain had. Cold, targeted, designed to soak in. She did not react, not a flinch, not a glare, not a tightening of her jaw. She simply opened the Ziploc bag on her lap, removed her resume, and reviewed it one more time, page by page, line by line, as if the only person in the room was her. The resume was pristine, crisp white paper, clean ink, not a single wrinkle, not a single smudge, not a single drop of water. She had carried it against her chest for 6 miles through a rainstorm, wrapped in plastic, shielded by her own body, and it had arrived in better condition than the young man's arrogance. She exhaled quietly, the tiniest release of tension. Then the front desk receptionist approached, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Her name tag read Janine. "Excuse me," Janine said, stopping in front of Marin and holding out a paper cup with a lid. Steam curled from the opening. "Someone asked me to give this to you." Marin looked at the cup, then at Janine. "I'm sorry." "Who?" "I don't know, hun. I was just told to bring you a coffee. Black." Marin reached out and took it. Her fingers, still cold, still slightly blue at the tips, wrapped around the cup like it was the first warm thing she'd touched in hours. Because it was. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the second word. Not from sadness, from the shock of unexpected kindness, in a room where someone had just laughed at her for being wet. Janine smiled, nodded, walked away. Marin held the coffee with both hands, let the heat seep through the paper and into her palms and up her wrists and into the part of her chest where 6 miles of cold had settled like stone. She didn't drink it right away. She just held it. The way you hold something you didn't earn and don't understand but desperately need. The young man watched the exchange from 2 chairs over. No one brought him coffee. No one brought anyone else coffee. Just the woman with the wet blazer and the dry resume and the quiet refusal to be broken by a room full of people who had never walked 6 miles for anything. Marin took her first sip shortly before her name was called. The interview door opened. Her name was called first. The room was smaller than she expected, a rectangular table. 3 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other. Hers. A glass of water already poured. A notepad and pen placed neatly beside it, as if someone had decided in advance that she might have something worth writing down. On the far side of the table sat 2 people. Vivian Hollis, HR director. Blonde hair pinned back, glasses, warm smile that felt practiced but not fake. Beside her, Grant Whitaker, VP of Operations, Tall, lean, gray at the temples, the kind of man who read every resume with a red pen and believed that doubt was the most useful tool in hiring. Between them, a third chair, empty. Marin noticed it immediately. Noticed the way it was angled slightly toward the table, as if someone had been sitting there recently and left or was expected to arrive. She didn't ask about it. She sat down, placed her resume on the table, folded her hands in her lap. Her fingers were still cold. She pressed them together to stop the trembling. "Miss Price," Vivian began, glancing at her file. "Thank you for coming in. We appreciate you making the time, especially given the weather today." "Thank you for having me," Marin said. Her voice was steady. She had rehearsed this opening many times. "I'm happy to be here." Standard questions followed. "Tell us about your experience. Walk us through your previous role. What software are you familiar with? How do you handle competing priorities?" Marin answered each one carefully. She knew logistics. She had coordinated routes for trucks at Trident. She understood scheduling software, inventory management, vendor timelines. Her answers were solid, not spectacular. Solid. The answers of someone who had done the work, but lacked the polish of a candidate who'd spent a decade climbing corporate ladders. Grant Whitaker wrote notes the entire time, short, clipped strokes. He hadn't smiled once. Then he looked up. "Miss Price, your resume shows a significant gap in employment. That's notable. And the role you're interviewing for requires someone who can manage high-pressure logistics across multiple regional offices simultaneously." He paused. Let the silence do its work. "What makes you think you can handle that kind of pressure?" Marin's hands tightened in her lap. She felt the familiar pulse of panic, the voice that said, "You don't belong here. You're a fraud. You walked 6 miles to sit in a room with people who will see right through you." A few seconds of silence. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitaker, for the last many months, I've been managing a household of 2 on a monthly income of very little. I coordinated emergency shelter placement for my daughter across multiple facilities, food banks, and medical assistance programs, all simultaneously, all with different eligibility windows, different documentation requirements, and different deadlines. I tracked every application on a spreadsheet on my phone. Dozens of job applications, each one customized to the listing. Several interviews, each one prepared for as if it were the only chance I'd ever get." She paused, not for effect, because the next sentence was the truest thing she'd ever said in a room full of strangers. "I've been managing supply chains my whole life, Mr. Whitaker. I just didn't have a title for it." The room went quiet. Vivian's pen had stopped moving. Her eyes were wide, not with pity, with recognition, the kind of look that said, "I've underestimated you, and I know it." Grant stared at Marin for a long moment. His red pen was still. His jaw tightened. He didn't nod. He didn't smile, but he didn't argue either. And for Grant Whitaker, silence was the closest thing to concession. Marin exhaled. Her hands loosened. The panic receded. Not gone. Just quieter, pushed down by something stronger. She was still wet, still cold, still the woman who had walked 6 miles to sit in a chair she wasn't sure she'd earned. But she had answered the question, and the answer had come from a place no certification could teach and no resume could capture. Then the door opened. Marin heard it before she saw it. The soft click of a handle, the whisper of air shifting as the room's pressure changed. Footsteps on carpet, measured, unhurried, the kind of walk that owned every room it entered. She turned her head. A man stepped through the doorway. Tall, silver-haired, dark suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body that morning. He carried nothing in his hands. No folder, no phone, no coffee cup, just presence. The kind that makes a room rearrange itself without being asked. Vivian straightened. "Mr. Sterling, we weren't expecting you." "I know," he said. Nothing else. He walked to the empty chair, sat down, unbuttoned his jacket with a single practiced motion, placed his hands flat on the table. Marin felt her stomach drop. She recognized him, not from the walk, not from the car she never saw, from the lobby. The massive photograph behind the reception desk, silver hair, dark suit, the same face, only now it was close, looking directly at her with eyes that gave away absolutely nothing. Knox Sterling, CEO. The name at the top of the building, the top of the letterhead, the top of everything. And he was sitting in the empty chair, watching her. Vivian and Grant exchanged a glance. This was irregular. Knox Sterling did not attend coordinator interviews. Not officially, not visibly. Whatever was happening, It wasn't on the schedule. Knox studied Marin for a few seconds, her blazer still damp at the shoulders, her hair still slightly wet at the edges, her hands folded on the table, steady, but not quite still. A faint tremor, cold or nerves, probably both, but her back was straight. Her eyes were forward. She did not look away. She did not apologize for her appearance. She did not shrink. "Miss Price," Knox said. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a man who chose every word the way a surgeon chose every cut. "I have one question." Marin swallowed. "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you reschedule when you saw the weather this morning?" The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Vivian's breath caught. Grant's pen froze mid-line. Marin looked at Knox Sterling, at the man who had everything, at the man who had never in his entire adult life been forced to choose between walking 6 miles in the rain or losing the only chance he'd been given in a long time. She didn't rehearse her answer. She didn't calculate. She just told the truth. "Because I've been waiting many months for someone to give me a chance. I've sent dozens of applications. I've been told no several times. This morning, the bus was canceled and I couldn't afford a ride, but I could walk, so I walked. I wasn't going to let rain take this away from me." The room was silent, not the polite professional silence of an interview pause. Real silence, the kind that fills a space when something true has been spoken and no one knows what to say next. Vivian's eyes were shining. Grant's pen was on the table untouched. And Knox Sterling, the man who had built a $4.7 billion empire on the belief that words were worthless and only actions mattered, sat perfectly still. Because he wasn't looking at Marin Price anymore. He was looking at Irene Sterling, young, white sneakers by the front door, soaking wet, lined with newspaper, ready for the next shift. His jaw tightened just once, just enough. A crack so small that only someone who had been watching him for years would have noticed it. 2 floors below in the lobby, Ella sat in a leather chair near the entrance, waiting. He couldn't see the interview. He couldn't hear it. But somehow, in the way that people who know other people deeply sometimes just know, he felt something shift. Like a wall somewhere high above him had just developed a fracture that would never fully close. If this story is resonating with you, take a second to subscribe for more stories like this. Now, let's continue. Here is something most people don't talk about. The systems we build to find talent are remarkably good at filtering out the people who need opportunity the most. Studies on hiring practices have shown that interviewers form judgments within the first few seconds of meeting a candidate, not based on answers, not based on skill, but based on appearance, the firmness of a handshake, the brand of a bag, the condition of a pair of shoes. Researchers call it affinity bias, the unconscious tendency to favor people who look, dress, and carry themselves the way we do. But it goes deeper than clothing. In the United States, studies have found that resumes with addresses from lower-income zip codes receive significantly fewer callbacks than identical resumes from affluent neighborhoods. The same qualifications, the same experience, the same words on the same page, but the zip code whispers something the hiring manager hears without knowing they're listening, and what it whispers is risk. For single mothers, the bias doubles. A gap on a resume, even one caused by raising a child alone while navigating eviction and medical debt and the collapse of every safety net that was supposed to hold, reads as instability, unreliable, flight risk. The language of hiring is clinical. The damage is personal. And then there's the question no one asks out loud, but everyone is thinking, can she really commit to this role? She has a kid, no partner. What happens when the child gets sick? What happens when school calls? What happens when the math of single parenthood collides with the demands of a demanding work week? Marin had the skills. She had the experience. She had walked 6 miles through a rainstorm and arrived early with documents so dry they could have been printed that morning. But every system she had encountered for many months was designed to see her wet blazer before her resume, to see the gap before the grit, to see the zip code before the person. Knox Sterling's interview room was no different. Except for one thing, the man sitting in the empty chair had watched her walk, and for the first time in his career, he was asking himself whether the system he trusted was measuring the right things. But Marin didn't know any of that. She just knew the interview was over, and now she had to wait. The conference room on an upper floor had a long walnut table, several chairs, and a view of downtown Charlotte that made the city look orderly and manageable from a height where poverty was invisible. Vivian Hollis sat at one end, Marin's file open in front of her. Grant Whitaker sat across from her, arms folded, red pen resting on his notepad like a weapon he hadn't decided to use yet. Knox stood by the window, back to both of them. "She's underqualified," Grant said first. He didn't waste time. That was his strength and his limitation. No degree, no certifications, a significant gap out of the workforce. Her last role was at a company no one's heard of managing a fleet a fraction of the size of ours. On paper, she's the weakest candidate we've seen today. Vivian tapped her pen against the file. Her answers were strong. The supply chain response was genuinely impressive. She understands logistics at an instinctive level. "Instinct doesn't run a regional routing operation," Grant countered. "I need someone who can work the software, manage vendor timelines, and handle pressure from regional managers who don't care about anyone's personal story. I need competence, documented, verified, measurable." "You need someone who shows up," Knox said quietly, still facing the window. Grant paused. "Sir?" Knox turned around. "You want measurable? Fine. She walked 6 miles in a rainstorm to get here. She arrived early. Her documents were in perfect condition. Her shoes were changed. Her blazer was wrung out by hand and put back on. She sat in a waiting room where another candidate mocked her, and she didn't flinch. She opened her resume and reviewed it like she was the only person in the room." He walked to the table, placed both hands flat on the surface. "I'm not hiring her because I feel sorry for her. I'm hiring her because she walked 6 miles in the rain and showed up on time with dry documents. That's not desperation, Grant. That's operational excellence." Grant's jaw tightened. "And if she can't handle the systems, if the gap in her resume means she's rusty, if the personal situation affects her reliability, then she's gone." "No hesitation," Knox said. 90-day probation, standard terms, same expectations as every other hire. No special treatment, no lowered bar. If she can't do the job, she goes, same as everyone else." Vivian looked between the two men. "So, we're offering her the position?" "We're offering her the same chance we offer anyone," Knox corrected. "She just has to prove she deserves to keep it the same way everyone does." He paused. "The only difference is I already know what she's willing to walk through to get here. Most candidates, I have to guess." Grant uncrossed his arms slowly. He didn't agree. Not yet. But he didn't argue either. And in that room with that man, silence was permission. Vivian made the call. That afternoon, Marin answered on the second ring. She said nothing for several seconds after hearing the offer. Then, in a voice that carried the weight of dozens of applications and many unanswered prayers, she said, "When do I start?" Marin Price started at Sterling Logistics on a Monday. She arrived well early. No one asked her to. The first week was disorientation dressed as orientation. New badge, new desk, new software system she'd never seen before. A proprietary routing platform called SteerPoint that required days of training just to navigate the dashboard. The learning curve was steep. The pace was relentless. Routes needed coordination across regional hubs. Vendor calls started early. Reports were due by end of day. She made mistakes. Small ones. A misfiled shipment code. A vendor callback she forgot to log. A report formatted in the old template instead of the new one. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to notice. Enough for the whispers to start. The rumor traveled through Sterling Logistics the way rumors always travel through large companies. Fast, distorted, and impossible to trace back to a single source. The CEO hired her personally. Some said it was charity. Some said it was worse. Nobody knew the details. Everybody had a theory. Marin felt the stares, in the break room, in the elevator, during team meetings where her contributions were acknowledged with polite nods but no follow-up questions. She was the outsider, the anomaly, the woman who arrived with wet hair on her first day and didn't explain why. She didn't explain anything. She just worked. By the third week, something shifted. It started with a routing anomaly she noticed while cross-referencing delivery schedules with pickup windows in the Piedmont corridor. Trucks were being dispatched to overlapping zones within the same time block, creating redundant mileage that no one had flagged because the system treated each route as an independent variable. Marin pulled the data, ran the numbers by hand because she didn't trust her SteerPoint skills yet. Double-checked on her phone calculator during lunch. The overlap was costing Sterling Logistics thousands a month in unnecessary fuel, driver hours, and wear on the fleet, every month for at least the past couple of years. She brought the finding to her team lead, a quiet man named Russell, who had been at Sterling for years and had never once been surprised by anything. He was surprised. "How did you catch this?" he asked. "I looked at it the way someone looks at a budget when they only have very little," Marin said. "You notice every penny that doesn't need to be spent." Russell took it to Grant Whitaker. Grant took it to operations. The fix was implemented within weeks. Significant savings recaptured, found by a woman who'd been on the job for a short time. By the 8th week, Marin was the first person in the office every morning. Before the lights were fully on, before the coffee machine had finished its first cycle, she used the quiet hour to review the previous day's routing reports, flag discrepancies, and prepare her morning briefs. By the time her team arrived, she'd already built the scaffolding for the day. She was also among the last to leave. Not every night, not when Zara had school events or when Beatrice needed her home. But most nights she stayed until the work was done, not until the clock said it was time to go. Beatrice picked Zara up from school on those evenings, fed her dinner, helped with homework, read her bedtime stories about butterflies and elephants and brave little girls who weren't afraid of storms. Marin called every night without fail, without exception, even when the call was only a couple of minutes long, even when all she said was, "I love you more than the whole sky." The end of her probation period arrived. Marin sat in Grant Whitaker's office for her performance review. The room was small and functional, no art on the walls, just charts, metrics, and a window with a view of the parking lot. Grant opened a folder. Inside was her evaluation. Thorough. He had reviewed every metric personally. Attendance, accuracy, an initiative, peer feedback, supervisor assessment. He read through the results without emotion. Satisfactory, above average, exceeds expectations. The checkboxes were clinical. The conclusion was not. At the bottom, in his own handwriting, Grant Whitaker had written one sentence: "Recommend for full employment, no reservations." He signed it, dated it, closed the folder. "Congratulations, Miss Price, he said. His voice was flat but professional, and he made eye contact when he said it. For Grant Whitaker, that meant something. Marin nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker." She walked out of his office, closed the door behind her, and stood in the hallway for a few seconds. Then she pressed her back against the wall, covered her mouth with one hand, and cried silently, briefly. The kind of crying that happens when something you've been holding together for a very long time finally gets permission to let go. That evening, Knox Sterling received an email from Grant Whitaker. No subject line, no attachment, just 2 words in the body. "You were right." Knox read it once, closed his laptop, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he left the office before sunset. The trouble started some weeks after Marin's probation ended. It started the way most trouble does in corporate environments, not with a confrontation, not with a public accusation, but with a conversation that wasn't meant to be overheard. Malcolm Hale was a senior regional manager who had been with Sterling Logistics for many years. He managed the Southeastern Corridor. He had numbers that consistently met targets. He had a corner office and a reputation for being thorough in ways that made some people respect him and other people avoid him. Malcolm believed in process, in documentation, in the measurable, verifiable, quantifiable truth of data. He did not believe in exceptions, in stories, or in hiring decisions made by a CEO who hadn't sat in on a coordinator interview in years and then suddenly appeared for one. It bothered him quietly at first, then less quietly. During a routine background audit of new hires, a detail surfaced that Malcolm had not expected to find. Marin Price had been evicted from her previous address over a year prior. Her credit score was low. She had an outstanding medical bill in collections, an unpaid utility balance, a history that, when reduced to numbers on a screen, painted a picture of financial instability that Malcolm found difficult to reconcile with someone handling daily logistics worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He brought it up in a management meeting, not with malice, with precision. "I'm not questioning her work performance," Malcolm said, leaning forward at the conference table. "I'm questioning the risk profile. We've given operations access to someone with a documented history of financial instability. How can we trust someone with our logistics operations when she can't manage her own finances?" The room was quiet, not because the question was unfair. It wasn't unfair. It had logic behind it. The kind of logic that looks reasonable on paper and devastating in practice. The kind of logic that confuses circumstances with character and poverty with incompetence. Vivian Hollis pushed back gently. Her performance metrics are above average. Grant signed off on her evaluation personally. Grant signed off on the probation period, Malcolm replied. I'm talking about the next period and the one after that. Patterns don't lie. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't need to. In a company of thousands of employees, a senior manager's doubt travels faster than any memo. Within weeks, Marin noticed the change, not in the work itself. The work was the same. Routes, schedules, vendor calls, reports. What changed was the air around the work. A silence in the break room when she walked in. A pause in conversation when she joined a group at the coffee machine. Eyes that lingered a second too long on her badge, on her desk, on the same face they'd been looking at for months, but were suddenly seeing differently. She didn't know Malcolm's name. She didn't know about the meeting. She didn't know that her credit score had been discussed in a room with glass walls and expensive chairs by a man who had never once been evicted from anything. But she knew something had shifted. The way you know it's going to rain before the first drop falls. The air changes, the pressure drops, and you start bracing for something you can't see yet. One night, she sat on the floor of Beatrice's living room, helping Zara glue cotton balls onto a paper cloud for a school project. The apartment was warm. The lamp was low. Clover the rabbit sat propped against a pillow, supervising. Marin's phone buzzed. An email. She glanced at it. Internal newsletter. Nothing urgent. But the act of looking at it pulled her back into the building, into the hallways, into the silence that had started following her like a shadow. She thought about quitting. The word appeared in her head, fully formed like it had been waiting there all along. Quit. Leave. Find something else. Somewhere no one knows your credit score. Somewhere you don't have to prove you deserve to exist in a building you helped make more efficient. Mama? Zara's voice pulled her back. Her daughter looked up at her with brown eyes that held no knowledge of credit scores or background checks or the weight of being judged for the worst chapter of your life. Do you like your new job? Marin looked at her daughter, at the cotton balls, at the paper cloud, at the purple crayon tucked behind Zara's ear, because she always kept one close just in case she needed to write something important. I love it, baby, Marin said, and her voice didn't waver. I love it so much. She put down the phone, picked up the glue, and pressed a cotton ball firmly onto the paper cloud, holding it there until it stuck. She wasn't going anywhere. Many floors above Marin's desk in a corner office with a view of the city, Knox Sterling sat reading Malcolm Hale's email. He read it once, read it again, then closed his laptop without replying. He turned to the window. The city was lit up below, thousands of lives visible only as moving headlights and glowing windows. Somewhere out there, a woman who walked 6 miles in the rain was deciding whether to stay at a job where someone had decided her past mattered more than her present. Knox said nothing, did nothing, not yet, but his jaw was tight, and his hands resting flat on the desk were not relaxed. Summit Foods was a major account, and Sterling Logistics was about to lose it. The problem had been building for months. Delayed shipments, missed delivery windows, complaints from warehouse managers across states who kept receiving freight late, always during the same period, winter months. Malcolm Hale managed the Summit account. He had thrown every resource at the problem, rerouted trucks, added drivers, extended shift hours. Nothing worked. The delays kept happening. Omei, predictable as snowfall, and every missed window cost Sterling credibility it couldn't afford to lose. Summit's procurement director had sent a formal notice. Fix the delays within weeks or the contract would be moved to a competitor. Malcolm had little time left, and he was out of ideas. Marin found the problem one evening late at night. Zara was asleep, Clover the rabbit tucked under her chin. Beatrice's apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clicking of a laptop that was several years old and ran hot if you used it for more than an hour. Marin had been reviewing the Piedmont corridor routing data for a separate task when she noticed the same pattern she'd flagged weeks earlier in the local routes. The SteerPoint software calculated optimal paths based on distance, traffic density, and fuel efficiency. But it didn't account for seasonal weather, not meaningfully, not dynamically. It used static averages, which meant that in winter, when ice, fog, and road closures altered conditions daily, the software was sending trucks down routes that looked efficient on screen, but were functionally impassable on the ground. The fix wasn't complicated. It required integrating a real-time weather overlay into the routing algorithm, something that could be done with an existing API that Sterling already licensed for another department but had never connected to logistics. Marin wrote the proposal in a couple of hours. Clear, concise. Problem identification, data evidence, proposed solution, implementation timeline, projected cost savings. She formatted it cleanly and professionally, because she didn't know how Sterling liked their documents, and figured the safest option was to make it impossible to dismiss on presentation alone. She didn't send it to Knox. She didn't have his email, and even if she had, the idea of a new coordinator emailing the CEO directly felt like stepping onto a stage she hadn't been invited to. So she sent it to Vivian Hollis with a single line in the body. I noticed something in the summit routing data. I think this might help. Please let me know if I'm overstepping. Vivian read it the next morning, then read it again, then forwarded it to Knox with her own single line. You need to see this. Knox read it on his phone during his morning drive. By the time Ellis pulled into the parking garage, he had read it multiple times. The solution was elegant, the data was sound, and the problem it addressed was one his senior operations team had failed to identify for months. He called Marin into his office that morning. She walked in looking the way people look when they've been summoned by the person whose name is on the building. Nervous, controlled, hands clasped in front of her, like a student called to the principal's office. You wrote this? Knox asked, holding up his tablet. Yes, sir. Summit's procurement team is coming in soon for what they've described as a final meeting. I want you to present this to them. Marin's face went still. Sir, I'm just a coordinator. I don't present to clients. I've never even been in a client meeting. You were just a coordinator, Knox said. His voice was quiet, not harsh, just certain. Now you're the person who solved a major problem that my senior team missed for months. You found it. You explain it. The meeting day arrived. The summit team sat on one side of the conference table. Executives in dark suits with the particular stillness of people who had already made up their minds. Malcolm Hale sat at the far end, silent. His folder was closed. He had nothing new to offer. Marin stood at the front of the room. She wore the same navy blazer, pressed, clean, the same blazer she'd walked 6 miles in. Beside her, a screen displayed her proposal. Her hands shook for the first 30 seconds. Then she started talking, not performing, not selling, just explaining. The way someone explains a problem they've lived inside of. The way someone who has spent her whole life finding the cheapest route, the fastest path, the most efficient way to stretch nothing into something, explains the logic of optimization to people who've only ever known abundance. She spoke for some time. When she finished, the room was silent. The summit procurement director leaned back in his chair, looked at his colleagues, then looked at Marin. When can you implement this? Malcolm Hale didn't say a word. Not during the meeting. Not after. He packed his folder, straightened his tie, and walked out of the conference room without looking at anyone. And Marin stood by the window for a moment after everyone had left. The city stretched out below her. Rain was falling, light this time, almost gentle. She pressed her hand against the glass the way someone else had pressed his hand against glass once, many floors up, watching a woman walk through a storm. She didn't know about that moment. She just stood there feeling the cold through the window and thought about how strange it was that the same rain that had once tried to stop her was now just weather, just water, just a Tuesday. 2 years later, Marin Price sat in an office on an upper floor of Sterling Logistics. Her name was on the door. Operations Manager, Southeast Division. 2 promotions in 24 months, each one earned with the kind of quiet, relentless competence that made people forget she'd ever been the woman with the wet blazer. But she never forgot. Her office was modest by Sterling standards. A desk, a bookshelf, a window facing east. On the bookshelf, between a logistics manual and a framed photo of Zara on her first day of a new school year, sat a small object that visitors sometimes noticed but never asked about. Clover the rabbit, retired from active duty, ears still limp, placed there by Zara herself, who declared that Mama's office needed someone to keep her company. Zara was older now. She had her own bedroom in an apartment Marin rented with her own paycheck. 2 bedrooms, clean kitchen, radiator that worked, windows that let in light without letting in wind. It wasn't luxury, laminate counters, builder-grade carpet, but it was theirs. The door locked from the inside. The lease was in Marin's name, and nobody could take it away. Zara had health insurance, dental too. She'd had her ears checked regularly, and every visit was covered. She was reading well above her level. She joined the school art club. Her latest project was a watercolor of a butterfly pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a star. Marin bought a car. Used, a reliable model with decent mileage and a scratch on the rear bumper that she never bothered to fix because it didn't affect the engine, and vanity was still a luxury. She ranked below groceries. She drove it to work every morning, a short commute, door to door, no matter the weather. She never walked 6 miles again, but the walk never left her. Knox Sterling had changed too. Though he would never describe it that way, he would say he'd adapted, recalibrated, adjusted his methodology based on new data. That was how his brain worked. But the people around him, Vivian, Ellis, even Grant Whitaker, saw something different. Something softer wasn't the right word. Something wider. Months after Marin's first promotion, Knox announced a new internal initiative. He stood in front of the entire Charlotte office, hundreds of employees in the main atrium, and introduced a program he had been quietly developing for some time, the 6 Miles Initiative, a comprehensive hiring and support program for single parents from economically disadvantaged backgrounds. It included subsidized transportation for the first several months, partnered childcare with local providers, a mentorship track pairing new hires with senior staff, resume workshops, interview coaching, and, most importantly, a hiring pipeline that evaluated candidates on demonstrated resilience and transferable skills rather than traditional credentials alone. No one in the room knew where the name came from. Knox didn't explain it. He stood at the podium, read the details, took questions, and sat down. Professional, measured, controlled. But Marin knew. She sat in the 3rd row, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward, and she knew exactly why it was called 6 Miles. And when Knox's gaze swept the audience and landed on her for exactly 1 second, she nodded. Just once. Just enough. That was all they needed. 2 people who understood the origin of something without needing to name it. A shared memory sealed in the space between a rainstorm and a conference room and a cup of coffee that arrived without explanation. In the small office designated for the program on a lower floor, there was a glass frame mounted on the wall near the entrance. Inside it, pressed flat and slightly yellowed, was a plastic grocery bag folded neatly, tied at the top. The kind you'd find in any kitchen drawer, in any apartment, in any city. Visitors glanced at it sometimes. Most assumed it was some kind of modern art, a statement piece. Nobody asked what it meant, but if you knew the story, if you knew what that bag had carried through 6 miles of rain, held against a chest that was soaking wet to protect documents that were perfectly dry, you would understand that it was the most expensive thing in the entire building, not in dollars, in what it cost the woman who carried it. In its first year, the 6 Miles Initiative placed dozens of single parents in full-time positions across Sterling Logistics and its partner companies. Most of them were still employed after a year. Many had received at least one promotion. Several had moved into stable housing for the first time in over a year. Numbers on a page, but behind every number was a morning, a decision, a pair of shoes, a walk that someone chose to take when every reasonable voice said, "Stop." Knox Sterling had spent his life believing that words were free and therefore worthless. But the 6 Miles Initiative wasn't built on words. It was built on a walk, on a plastic bag, on a woman who showed up soaking wet with dry documents and said she wasn't going to let rain take this away from her. And that, Knox had learned, was worth more than anything he'd ever built. 2 years after she walked 6 miles through a rainstorm, Marin Price was driving to work on a morning when the sky opened up. Not the slow, steady kind, the other kind. The sudden, furious, personal kind that turned windshield wipers useless and streetlights into smeared ghosts behind sheets of water. She was on the same road, the same stretch she had walked many months earlier in shoes that filled with water and a blazer that weighed more wet than dry. The Toyota's heater hummed. The seats were warm. The radio played something soft that Zara had chosen before school drop-off, still set to the same station because Marin never changed it. She liked driving in her daughter's world. Then she saw her on the sidewalk heading east. A woman, young, dark hair plastered to her face, a blazer that didn't fit right in the shoulders, and in her hands pressed against her chest, a plastic bag knotted at the top, wrapped around something flat. Documents. Marin's foot moved to the brake before her brain formed a thought. The car slowed, stopped. She pulled to the curb, reached across, and opened the passenger door. The woman looked at her, startled, suspicious, soaked. "Get in," Marin said. "I've been where you are." The woman hesitated, looked at the open door, at the warm car, at the dry seats, at the woman behind the wheel whose eyes held something she couldn't name but somehow recognized. She got in. Marin pulled back onto the road. The wipers beat their rhythm. The heater wrapped around both of them, and for a few blocks neither of them spoke. Then the woman said quietly, "I have an interview downtown. I couldn't afford the bus." Marin nodded. "I know." She didn't explain how she knew. She didn't need to. Some things are understood between people who have carried documents through rain, who have chosen walking over waiting, who have learned that the distance between where you are and where you need to be is measured not in miles, but in the willingness to keep moving when every voice says stop. Marin drove her to the building, watched her step out into the rain, straighten her blazer, and walk through the front door with her back straight and her bag held tight. Then Marin sat in the car for a moment, engine running, wipers clearing the glass. She thought about Knox Sterling, about a black Maybach 2 blocks behind her on a morning just like this one, about a man who watched from his car and didn't stop, who followed instead of helped, who observed instead of offered. She understood now why he had done it. The test, the distance, the need to see what someone does when no one is watching. But she also understood what he had missed, what it took him time and a walk through a rainstorm to learn. You don't have to test people to see their worth. You just have to stop the car. The distance between where you are and where you belong is not measured in miles. It's measured in the number of people willing to stop and say, "Get in, I see you." Knox had watched from his car. Marin had walked through the rain. But in the end, it was Marin who taught him the most expensive lesson of his life, that the test you design for someone else is always, in the end, a test for yourself. And she had passed. Not by walking 6 miles, not by arriving on time, not by keeping her documents dry while her body shook with cold. She passed by stopping the car, by doing the one thing Knox couldn't do on that rainy morning, by looking at a stranger in the rain and choosing, without hesitation, without calculation, without a single thought about what it might cost or what she might gain, to simply help. That was the lesson. That was the whole story. Not wealth, not power, not the distance between a Maybach and a pair of wet shoes. Just a woman who remembered what it felt like to walk alone and refused to let anyone else do it. Thank you for watching. If this story reminded you of someone who never gave up, share it with them. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you on the next one.